Hi everybody. In this video I just want to talk a little bit about the different components that are put together to make up a complete table tennis racket. These components being rubbers, such as the ones that you can see here, and blades, which is the wooden part of the racket, such as you can see here. Once we've talked a little bit about rubbers and blades, we'll just get onto the subject of pre-made versus custom table tennis rackets and what's the difference between them. So to get things started, let's talk a little bit about table tennis rubbers. For our purposes, there's two main types of table tennis rubbers. There's what we call a pips out table tennis rubber, and then there's a pips in table tennis rubber. For a pips out table tennis rubber, such as you can see on this particular bat here, which has a pips out rubber on both sides, and you can see the pips there. They mean pips out simply because where the surface that's being used to hit the ball, the pimples are on the outside, so the pimples will actually make contact with the ball, hence the name pips out. By contrast, a pips in rubber, which is also commonly called an inverted rubber or a smooth rubber, in those particular ones, they have the pimples facing inwards so that the surface used to hit the ball is actually smooth. Talking about pips out rubbers, with pips out rubbers you're allowed to use them either with the pips covering glued directly onto the wood of the blade, such as in this particular racket, where if I hold it sideways, it's possible to see that the black and red coverings here are actually glued straight onto the wood. There's nothing in between them. This is often called a hard bat rubber, or sometimes an ox rubber, where ox is OX, and that's short for orthodox, simply because way back in the day the normal orthodox rubbers were these type of rubbers with pips on the outside and no sponge. However, it is also perfectly legal to use a racket such as this one here, which is my actual racket I play with, where the pips themselves have a layer of sponge underneath, and you can see there that the black surface that's used to hit the ball has a layer of yellow sponge underneath it. And when it's used like this, these are called a sponge rubber, or sometimes a sandwich rubber, because the sponge layer is sandwiched between the wood of the blade and the black top sheet. And we call it a top sheet because it sits on top of the sponge, or if there's no sponge being used, it sits on top of the blade. So as you can see here, for this particular pips out rubber, it's made up of a combination of a yellow sponge layer and the black top sheet. By contrast, when we talk about inverted rubbers or smooth rubbers, what they have there is you have again a top sheet, but inverted rubbers have to also have a layer of sponge. It's not actually legal to take a pips out rubber like this pips out rubber. It's not legal to just turn that around and glue it directly onto the blade so that the smooth side is outwards, but with no layer of sponge. Not allowed to do that. So instead, any inverted rubber will always have a layer of sponge underneath it. The thickness of the sponge isn't actually specified. It can be differing thicknesses, varying from typically half a millimetre upwards to around about 2 to 2.5 millimetres. The important thing as far as the rule makers, the ITTF, are concerned, is that the total thickness of the sponge and the red top sheet here can't be more than 4 millimetres when glued onto a blade. So if I put this sponge rubber, this inverted rubber, onto my blade and glue it on, the total thickness of this side of it, where I'm talking about the sponge and the red top sheet, also the glue layer, so if you're using a lot of glue, that will also add to it, that total thickness can't be more than 4 millimeters. 4 millimeters thick, that's the maximum. When we're talking about pips out rubbers when used with sponge, again, can't be more than 4 millimeters thick, and when used by themselves with no sponge, the maximum limit 2 millimeters. And that's really the difference between, in terms of rubbers. Pips out can be used with or without sponge. Inverted rubbers have to be used with sponge. Now, just to talk a little bit about pre-made versus custom rackets. A pre-made racket really is just a racket that the manufacturer puts together. He puts the rubbers onto the blade, glues it all together, and when you, the customer, come along and buy it, the blade and rubber is already ready to go, so that the racket is completed. And this one here and this bat here, these two paddles, are both examples of pre-made table tennis rackets. And although generally speaking the performance that you get from these pre-made type of rackets is generally not as much as you'd get from a custom racket, really the main difference in terms of definition is just the fact that when you buy them, they're already complete. By contrast, for a custom table tennis racket, what you do is you order the blade by itself, and you can pick out the blade either from your local dealer or online. So you'd pick out a blade and you'd pick out a red rubber to go on one side and a black rubber to go on the other side, which can be completely different. Pick out the blade and the rubbers you want, and then they send them to you and you put them together yourself. Or occasionally some of the distributors will actually are kind enough for you to order your blade and your rubbers and they'll glue them together for you. But really that's your basic definition between a pre-made and a custom racket. It's just a pre-made comes fully put together. With a custom table tennis racket, you buy the blade separately, buy the rubber separately, and either you or the distributor then puts them together so that it's custom, all set up to go. One final thing I'll just give you a quick little look at is when you order a rubber, you usually get them in these type of rubber packages, and what they are is, this particular one is sealed in plastic to help the rubber stay fresh longer. And what you then do is just open up the plastic, open up the packaging, and there is quite a bit of packaging on this one. There we go. And what you have inside is actually a square piece of rubber. And the reason you get a square piece of rubber is so that when you glue this onto your blade, it's a little bit bigger than the typical size of your blade, which means that you've got a little bit of leeway. If you've got a blade that's a little bit bigger than normal, you've got a little bit of excess rubber so that you do fully cover the head of your racket. And once glued on, you just grab your scissors and you can trim around the edges so that you finish up with your racket all neatly trimmed. This particular racket, my own custom racket, is one that obviously I ordered and put together, and I'm using on the forehand at the moment a rubber called Domination from Dr. Neubauer. On the backhand I'm using a long pip rubber called Stiga Destroyer, and I originally received my Stiga Destroyer just like this in a square sheet, glued it on, and then just trimmed them with a pair of scissors, and you get quite a nice finish. A racket such as this one typically goes for, say, around, the blade itself cost me, I think, somewhere around about the $120 mark. Each rubber's around about $50 or so. So you're looking at somewhere around $220 to $230 for this particular bat. The rubbers, the inverted will last usually maybe 3 to 6 months. The pip side lasts a bit longer, perhaps 6 months to a year, but gives good performance. In contrast, a pre-made, these particular pre-mades I think cost around $3 or $4, and as you can expect, the performance is quite limited. Certainly not very spinny, not very grippy, and you wouldn't be able to play any advanced table tennis strokes really with these particular ones. That's not to say that there are no good pre-made paddles. There are some good ones for less than $25 that give quite good performance, and you can play advanced table tennis strokes with them. They're not quite as impressive in the performance as a custom racket, but they're perfectly good for a new player who's looking to learn some of the advanced strokes. They're fine for that. And you can use those sort of pre-mades for around about, say, 6 months or so, and then when you're finished with it, rather than taking the rubbers off and changing the rubbers, you simply can throw away and ditch the whole racket.